All right, guys, we are working through our Women in Theology material here. And we've talked to Catherine of Siena a little bit in this issue of holiness. We've talked about Julian of Norwich. And the last of the three women that I would like to talk about as it comes to this particular issue is Joan of Arc. And here's kind of the game plan. I'm going to take a little bit more of a creative twist on this. I think what I'm going to do today is kind of talk you through some stories or some situations in the Bible where women feature in pretty unique kind of ways. And then what I want to provide you with is a series of stories to go and take a look at, okay, from the scripture and the story of Joan of Arc. And I'll have a link in the say hi.
Hi.
I'll have a link for you in the Power School description that lets you know where I want you to go to get your information for Joan of Arc. Okay, that article is coming from history and like history.com, History Channel, right? It's coming from some of that material, and so I want you to go and look at that for the Joan of Arc story. It's pretty big picture, right? So it's really broad. It covers a lot of ground in very little time. And so I'd like you to start there. And ultimately, I'd like you to take your lead from there and go into some other things and see if you can dig into Joan's story a little bit more. Okay. And what I'm going to be asking for you guys to do is make some parallels, is to link some ideas from the Joan of Arc story to the other women, Julian of Norwich and Catherine of Siena, and the other female characters in the text of Scripture, okay? And then there will be some work that comes along with that and goes to Power School for you. When that will all be due, I'm not entirely sure. I want to go back and take a look at the holiness discussion and make sure that it's posted and clear sort of from the calendar, so I'm not stacking things up on you. One, I don't want to do that to you. Two, I don't need it stacked up on you because then it ends up stacking up on me later. So the game plan is this. You may be doing some prep work before you see this assignment come due, but just know that the assignment is coming because I'm going to ask you to do something kind of creative with these the stories of these women that we've encountered in this little snippet of women in theology. And so as we jump into this, let's go to the text of Judges really quickly, because there's a couple of ladies that feature pretty strongly in the text of Judges, okay? And there's actually quite a few, but there's a couple of women who feature really strongly in the text. And I want that to sort of lead our conversation. So here we go. So Judges chapter 4 has the story of Deborah. Sorry, I for some reason had the wrong chapter, and so I had to go find it. Story of Deborah is in Judges chapter 4. And the Israelites have fallen into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who is reigning in Hatzor. And Deborah is a prophetess, we're told, in verse 4 of the chapter. And she used to sit under what's called the palm of Deborah. It's a palm tree. Ironically, they named it after her. And so she's sitting under this tree, and people would come to her to inquire of the Lord. And so she calls for Barak, who is supposed to be the judge for the people of Israel. And she gives him a message of what he is supposed to go and do. And basically he says, yeah, sure, I'll go do it, but only if Deborah comes along with me. And then Deborah ends up having to be the catalyst for the rest of the story, sort of poking and prodding Barak along in order to get him to do what God has told him to do from the beginning. And so what I want you to do is read the story of Deborah, which is Judges chapter 4, and then it might be good for you to read Judges chapter 5, which is the Song of Deborah. And so I would read Judges 4 and Judges 5, okay? And I need a pen. Okay, so Judges 4 and 5, all right? So that you can be versed in the story of Deborah, okay? Then what I want you to do is go to Judges 13, okay, with the story of Samson's birth announcement. This is about the conversation between the angel of the Lord and Samson's parents, but it features pretty strikingly Samson's mother. The ironic piece to that is that she's never actually named in the storyline, but she plays a significant piece to what is happening here in the story. So I want you to pay attention to that one. Okay. And then there is another in 1 Samuel 25. David is running from Saul, and in the middle of this running, he meets an individual whose name is Abigail. Okay. And she has some very interesting interactions with David. Now, one of the things that's really important about her is the wisdom that she demonstrates in interacting with David. And so I want you to pay attention to that. Sort of her ability to discern the situation, to decipher out kind of what's going on in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and then to sort of intercept what David is about to do and head that off at the pass with good wisdom, with counsel, and with just some practical insight. And so I want you to pay attention to that story. And then the last of the stories, so you've got Judges 4 and 5, Judges 13, 1 Samuel 25, and then the last one I want you to pay attention to is going to take place in two places, but it's the same story. Matthew, okay, Matthew 1, beginning in verse 18 and down to the end of the chapter. So 1:18 through 25. It's the first chapter of Matthew, okay? And then the second passage I want you to pay attention to. Excuse me, I'm sorry. The second chapter I want you to pay attention to is in the Gospel of Luke. And it is, let's see, in Luke chapter 1, okay, verse 26. And it starts in 26, and it goes down to actually, there might be one more story I sneak in here. But anyway, Luke 1:26 through, we'll go 1:26 through 56. Okay, so those 30 or so verses from the first chapter of Gospel of Luke, and then I want you to go to the end of the Gospel of John, John chapter 20. Okay, and beginning in verse 1 down to about verse 18. Okay. We'll do that. So John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18 will cover us there with that particular insight. And let's see, Luke chapter 1, Matthew chapter 1, those verses that will be noted for you in the content block. So just pay attention to those verses. 1 Samuel chapter 25, pay attention to the character of Abigail. Judges 13 and Samson's mother in this interaction, pay attention to her a little bit. And then Judges 4 and 5 with Deborah and Barak. Okay, so here's the thing. I want you to pay attention to what's going on with these particular ladies, and then I want you to take a look at the Joan of Arc story. Or you can look at the Joan of Arc story and then look at these stories. Either one is fine with me. But here's what I want you to do in doing that. I want you to begin looking for parallels, overlaps, and points of intersection in the stories. Okay. Where does Joan of Arc and what is transpiring in her story, where does it look like, intersect with, overlap with, sound really similar to the Joan of Arc story, the Deborah story? I forgot who I started with there. So you're looking at Joan of Arc's and then you're comparing it to Deborah's. Where do they look a lot alike? You're looking at Joan of Arc's story, then you're looking at the Abigail story. You're looking at Matthew and Luke's accounts of Mary and the visit from the angel to Mary in announcing Jesus' birth. Where does that story sound a little bit like the Joan of Arc story? And then John, the end of the gospel, John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18, where does Mary, Magdalene and Mary going to the tomb to anoint the body and all of this and finding it empty on Easter Sunday? Where does this stuff with these women and these biblical stories sound like pieces and elements to the Joan of Arc story? Start your Joan of Arc material with the link that will be provided for you. But I would strongly encourage you, do a little bit of digging outside of that and let's see if you can, let's see what we can compile here. And then what you're going to do is sort of do some recreating of your own making. So this is where you're at, and then we're gonna dive into some of the history. And so go take a look at the content block and check the links, the information that's present there, along with this list of passages, and this will help orient what you're doing. But basically, this is a little bit more independent. You'll still get a video from me come Friday. But now that I changed my game today on what we were going to do in these next couple of days or whatever, it may end up taking a little bit of a different shape, and it may be really brief, like this one is. So that is what you were paying attention to. Love you guys, miss you, and I hope that you are well. Take a look at the content block. Okay, follow the instructions that are there, and the process that I will lay out there for you. I'll make it nice and clear. This video will be there so you can go back and kind of hear me talk through this again. But let's start there. All right. Thanks, guys. See you next time.